Доброго дня, шановні гості, спікери.
Good afternoon, dear guests, dear speakers, and those who watch us online. And I'm happy to announce the opening of a big press conference devoted to Ukraine's anti-corruption theory of change.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present to you a memo which we prepared in AntAC. Its name is Ukraine's Anti-Corruption Theory of Change, Recipe for Success and Lessons Learned for the Window of Opportunity. Those of you who registered for our broadcasting can receive this text on your email. The others can go online on the website of AntAC, antac.org.ua/n, and find it there. In 2013-2014, the historic window of opportunities opened in Kyiv. To a large extent, our anti-corruption fight was inspired by the examples of Georgia and Romania. Since then, new anti-corruption tools, instruments, and approaches were tested out in Ukraine. Over almost 8 years, Ukraine accumulated precious experience, which we have summarized in our memo. This is the perspective of Reforms Insiders. We want this memo to be a collection of very practical ideas. It might be useful for the leaders from the transitional democracies who would like to prepare for the window of opportunities in their countries. We would also like it to be useful for the international partners while planning their activities in the countries which face similar challenges as Ukraine does. AntAC believes that effective anti-corruption is a fundamental prerequisite for the successful transition from the autocracy to democracy. The successful anti-corruption strategy should be based on the significant elevation of risks for corrupt actors. But who could do this and how this can be achieved? In our memo, we elaborated our anti-corruption theory of change. You can see it on the infographics now. It is based on 3 pillars: the drivers of the reform and 2 reform deliverables: overwhelming transparency, that's basis for corruption prevention, and effective system for criminal justice. This infographics is a part of our memo, so you can find it here to look at it with more details. Drivers of the anti-corruption reform include civil society organizations, investigative journalists. It is worth separately mentioning the ability of the civil society actors and journalists to unite in the coalitions. Also, international partners and reformers inside the government play an important role in driving anti-corruption reform forward. Civil society activists and investigative journalists are key assets and driving forces of the real democratization in any country. They should prepare for the window of opportunity, but they can already achieve a significant result, meaningful results, even under the autocratic rule. For example, during the presidency of Viktor Yanukovych, Ukrainian civil society organizations and journalists achieved following results: small victories, which later paved the way for the large-scale transformations, like, for example, the adoption of the law on the access to public information. Also, they developed workings which despite have been lying on the shelves without any move for years, were put on the table immediately after Yanukovych fled the country and pro-Russian coalition dissolved in the parliament. Also, journalists were shedding the light on the kleptocratic corrupt schemes, while civil society organizations were collecting information about kleptocrats' foreign assets, which later helped to introduce the sanctions of the Western countries against Yanukovych and his close allies. Activists and journalists are doing really dangerous work. Therefore, it is very important, besides investing in their advocacy, communications, fundraising capacities and potential, to also provide them with the political support for their brave activities, as well as necessary protection. Synergetic cooperation of CSOs and international partners is instrumental. CSOs are more vocal and less bounded in their public communications. Usually they have a very good understanding of the local political context and are more quickly and easier following the devil in details. International partners have good political capital, expertise, and strong advocacy leverage, including the financial assistance. Therefore, we believe that such financial assistance and other type of international assistance should be conditioned on the set of strong conditionalities, reform deliverables. In the case of Ukraine, Visa Liberalization Action Plan and IMF memorandums proved to be miracle makers in pushing the reforms forward. Another pillar of Ukraine's anti-corruption theory of change is transparency. You can also see this on the infographics. Opening up state-controlled information about who owns what and how state funds are being used is a very helpful tool for the civil society and investigative journalists to name and shame corrupt officials. In Ukraine, these transparency tools are registries like company registry, vehicles registry, land cadastre, or real estate registries, Prozoro public procurement system, website for the use of public funds. However, the most important and the most comprehensive tool is electronic asset declaration system. Such a system could be effective only in case if it includes both public registry with a very detailed data that concerns a public official as well as their family members, and strict working sanctions for non-submission of the declaration, false statements in the declaration, and illicit enrichment. The cases into investigations of these violations should fall under the jurisdiction of the truly independent agencies. In case of Ukraine, that's National Anti-Corruption Bureau, to ensure that public servants are afraid of potentially strict punishment. Such a holistic system is itself a very powerful preventive measure tool. Public officials are aware that once they lie in the declaration or their lifestyle does not correspond with the officially declared income, there is a high likelihood that they will be brought to liability. In case of illicit enrichment, which exceeds a special threshold, they could even face prison. The variety of transparency tools, in their turn, could boost new civil society and private-driven initiatives, like, for example, the first ever national registry of politically exposed persons. It was launched by AntAC, and it is grounded on the information from these registries and electronic declaration system that I mentioned. The aim of this registry is to facilitate fighting against money laundering by providing financial institutions with credible information for their due diligence over the financial transactions of Ukrainian public figures. The third pillar, also shown on the infographic, is establishment of independent anti-corruption and judicial institutions. I think that we can turn off the infographic already. Such a move might be an effective way to go in the countries where large-scale reforming of the law enforcement, prosecution, and judiciary would take much longer time and is not guaranteed, is not secured. After Maidan, Ukraine has built a range of new anti-corruption institutions like National Anti-Corruption Bureau, Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, High Anti-Corruption Court, Asset Management and Recovery Agency, as well as National Agency for Corruption Prevention. The new institutions of the criminal justice, NABU, SAPO, and Anti-Corruption Court, are already bringing high-profile officials to liability. These institutions would be effective only if there are necessary independent safeguards in place. The selection of the management is a cornerstone issue. Ukrainian experience uncovered a huge, important, and effective potential of the engagement of international partners in the selection panels if they are granted with the right of the crucial say in the process. Such a crucial role of foreign experts proved to be a real game changer, and the best illustration for that was the experience of the High Anti-Corruption Court. International and civil society engagement without the crucial role will eventually be used as the window dressing for the whole process. Unfortunately, we have not a positive experience of the Supreme Court establishment, where the Public Integrity Council did enormously huge job in scrutinizing all of the candidates who ran to the Supreme Court. But because their opinions were not binding, they were overruled by the judicial governance bodies and eventually did not have the proper impact on the whole process of the selections. In fact, the successful establishment of new institutions require the engagement of the reform actors throughout the whole process, well beyond the advocacy of the legislation only. It requires active engagement in the process of the recruitment of the candidates who could run for the top managerial, but also to the mid-level offices as well. It requires engagement in the institutional building, protection from undue political influence, and political pressure, watchdogging of the activities over the activities of these new bodies, as well as constructive criticism for their work, is also instrumental. Ukraine's experience proves that countries where corruption is deeply rooted, it's almost impossible to fight against corruption with the internal resources only. So for other countries which might be willing to introduce the experience of Ukraine with foreign engagement in the selection of the management of the new institutions, AntAC recommends for the international community to consider establishing the pool of the international experts who might be interested to get engaged in the similar commissions in other countries too, and to pick people from that list in case if the countries would introduce similar experience and secure the crucial role for the foreign experts in the selection panels. However, the reflections will not be balanced without the part on lessons learned. So what's the most important lessons which we drew from our 8-year fight against corruption? The first one, any window of opportunity should be used to launch the reform of the judiciary. Non-reformed courts are the real threat to any healthy initiative and any reform in any sector and in any sphere. In Ukraine, we came to understand that judicial reform should start from reforming judicial governance bodies, basically the judges for judges. And then the reform of the constitutional court should also follow. Transitional democracies require flexible approaches and bold, innovative solutions. Established European standards of the majority of judges taking part in the judicial governance bodies would not work in case if the system is not cleaned before it. Together with other civil society organizations from Ukraine, Armenia, Bulgaria, Moldova, and Romania, we developed a set of the recommendations which were presented during this year Democracy in Action conference. And what we recommend, that judicial governance bodies should be reformed, taking into account political and historical context of each particular country. It's important to engage independent outsiders in the process of the reforming. In case of Ukraine, that was international partners. If there is the real political will, there could also be the civil society experts, but also only in case if they are having the same crucial role as I already mentioned. Or it is also important to arrange integrity scrutiny for all those people who are running to take the offices in the judicial governance bodies. Disinformation could be also a real threat to democracy, especially if it targets reforms and reformers, including the Western partners. This has been happening in Ukraine for a while. This requires a very proactive communication from the side of the reformers, well beyond the bubble of the experts or the politically active minority. It is very important to reach out to the wider audience, and it could be done via the most effective communications channels. In case of Ukraine, that's television. The owners of the most popular TV channels are oligarchs who are actively doing business with the West. That is why it is logical to demand from them that their channels are not attacking the reforms, and on the contrary, they are helping to disseminate the positive messages about the reforms. Communicative reform killing should be treated with all due seriousness by the international partners and should also be the subject to sanctioning. Foreign investors and international institutions should feel the pressure to stop doing business with oligarchs whose media attack democracy and reforms. Thank you very much for listening to this overview of our memo. We welcome you to look through the entire text and get back to us with your feedback or questions. Please stay tuned, as very shortly we will follow with the discussion on what's next and what should be the way forward for the anti-corruption reform. Thank you. Я можу запросити спікерів? Доброго вечора.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. During previous session, I presented a memo prepared by Anti-Corruption Action Center, and this was dedicated to Ukraine's anti-corruption theory of change, and we've described 7 years of fight of investigative journalists, international partners who fought for the biggest democracy achievements in the sphere of development of anti-corruption institutions. We should speak not only about difficulties we face each day, but also we should recognize the progress. And this panel now is dedicated to discussions how to move forward ahead in order to preserve our achievements and to interact better, and what should be the main focus for us in order that in 5 years the societal request for fighting corruption and for justice was satisfied. So I have the honor to present our today's speakers. Yaroslav Yurchyshyn, Member of Parliament of Ukraine, First Deputy Chairman of the Anti-Corruption Policy Committee, Artem Romaniukov, co-founder of the Save Dnipro initiative. Online. Oleksandra Hubytska, editor of Nashi, Groshi.Lviv, and Frank Paul, Governance and Rule of Law Digital Team Leader at the Support Group for Ukraine, European Commission. We give the floor to Yaroslav Yurchyshyn. He is the former head of Transparency International Ukraine, and now you have versatile experience in advocacy of anti-corruption reform, and you know about many drivers of changes. What should be done in order to preserve our achievements and to continue to support this impulse of reform's momentum? The first and the most important reforms, they are not the state, they are a process. That's why we should provide institutional support to Anti-Corruption Bureau and National Agency for Preventing Corruption, and to help Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office and the agency that deals with confiscated assets. About the first one, about Specialized Prosecutor's Office. There was a contest, and we promised to our international partners to deal with it properly. There should be two aspects dealt with. We should provide legislation for independence of this contest, and the unique recipe for anti-corruption action is a proper independent selection process of the management of this institution, and also Constitutional Court and other bodies, they should deal with these issues properly, and our international experts should be heard. And also there is lack of proper office of SAPO and General Prosecutor's Office. This is 100%. These people are not independent, and we should improve legislation for ARMA at the stage of planning and at the stage of management of confiscated assets. We need proper cooperation with our international partners. And now we are at the stage when institutional support, and here I should remember organizations of civil society. If we have an official new body, but if it doesn't have proper system of monitoring from the side of civil society organizations, then its independence won't be guaranteed. So we should have proper cooperation with civil society, with councils, public councils of monitoring. There should be the Zorro network involved. There should be proper efficiency, and we should have proper involvement of civil society in the process. Now we are at the stage where we have this momentum of reform, And we should send this impulse to other areas. We should provide proper reforms to courts and also the members, the officials who should be reassessed, and the head of SBU, he has such an opportunity. They may prevent access to state secret, and there will be imitation of reform, and the result will be like in the State Investigation Bureau. State Investigation Bureau, we remember that it was a great struggle to bring this bureau in line to the Constitution of Ukraine and to provide proper responsibilities to the Ministry of Cabinet of Ministers to provide proper procedures. And also these structures, they became politicized, and Yuri Butusov's case, you may assess it differently how the questions were asked, but you should not prosecute president after one question. This is not correct. So State Investigation Bureau needs reform, and also State Investigation Bureau, they should work properly. Now we do not have proper activity of this body. And about courts, Olena mentioned it in the introductory word. So we should reform courts to get rid of unfair judges. We should rebuild trust to courts, and citizens should be able to file the cases to the courts without any problems. So people do not like to address courts at the moment. So now also important issue is fighting oligarchs, and we do not use mechanisms properly. Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine or law enforcement system and profile ministry and regulatory commission in the sphere of energy and in the sphere of media. Why we do not use these mechanisms? Because they are inefficient. They do not work in the interests of the market. The procedure of formation of anti-monopoly committee does not envisage independent contest. That's why traditionally there are people close to power, and they are close to oligarch circles, and also so our oligarchs build these monopolies, and we cannot expect that these people would fight monopolies. We focus on the questions that are ahead of us. We are going to speak about Anti-Corruption Bureau and the electronic system of declaration and other bodies. They need institutional support at the legislative and organizational level, and the responsibilities of the National Anti-Corruption, of National Agency of Corruption Prevention, they should be reinforced, and they should follow proper procedures. But we have good examples of work of some institutions, new approaches of formation of institutions, new transparent contests, higher levels of salary, good management, and proper premiums and payments that are transparent, and NABO and SBU, they differ very much in this respect. Also, they have partners in private sector, in the public sector. They provide proper assessment and provide proper advice on development, and we see that we should work in different areas, and we should do it quickly. This is for 2.5 years. We should change political configuration by small steps. We should squeeze out corruption from courts, from judiciary, security. We should have proper anti-monopoly legislation, and step by step, we should form zero tolerance to corruption in other bodies of power. Thank you. Thank you, Yaroslav. This was a really comprehensive answer. This was a helicopter view, and at the same time, this was a cross-sectoral approach. Artem, I have a question to you. Civil society played a major role and continues to play its major role in reforms. But we have a lot of plans, but many reforms that they are implemented in Kiev, not throughout Ukraine. So locally, people do not feel that there is this fight against corruption. Not always people have such a feeling. And what about the situation in the regions, and what should be the priorities in fighting corruption in order to feel this justice locally, to be closer to people? Thank you for your question. I will start my answer with bad news in order to go to the better news at the end of my speech. The law enforcement system in the regions is inactive and inefficient. Unfortunately, we are people who are involved in the activities at the regional levels. I wanted to bring the case, but I couldn't find the real serious case at the mid-level, at the local level. I couldn't find the case of an official who would be brought to justice for corruption. So we do not have good news on this. But I would like to broaden this topic. We have some local cases. Usually, this is the contribution of national bodies that were created due to reform. If we take Odessa case, we have high-profile official, the mayor of the city, together with his allies. I cannot say how we may call them legally, but this was the case of National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Also, Kiev is one of the regional cases. Here, all reforms are done, but the corruption that is flourishing in the sphere of development, this is under the radar because there are no players who may deal with it efficiently in law enforcement area. And at the regional level, we have some good things that allow our civil society work efficiently. This is access to open data, to registers, and it was mentioned before. And it allows monitoring, and they may bring this information to the broader public. There are registers, the system of public procurement that is called Prozoro. So due to the system, now we are able to see many things, but there is lack of proper environment around Prozoro. So we opened the procurement, but State Audit Service remains unreformed. Key actors who should provide controlling function in procurement, they are the same. They didn't change. Also, I would like to say that we have decentralization that provided budgets at the local level, but with this decentralization of budgets, corruption was also decentralized. if you are a local corrupt official, in many cases, you do not need to fight for the position at the cabinet of ministers or to go to the parliament. Budgets in the big cities, they are big enough, so they may stay at a local level and to have the same corrupt profits as they had before at the national level. So this is about lack of control at the regional level and the lack of efficiency of law enforcement bodies. So we are working together, and this is about environmental and anti-corruption issues. And I would like to say that in 2017, the law entered into force that allows the public to take decisions in environment issues. This is about environment impact assessment. The key player, the main controller in this area, the state environmental inspection, that should have had some serious leverage to deal with corruption in environment sector. It remains the most corrupt from all the controlling bodies and inspections in Ukraine. That's why we uncovered a lot of things for a local level. This is really good instrument to inform people on corruption, on crimes, but we lack some cross-sectoral approach in law enforcement because we have corruption everywhere, not only in one area. We need cross-sectoral approach to eradicate corruption in different areas because this is not only about NABU, this is about other bodies. So I remember that in 2016 I heard from my colleague, this was Daria Kalinyuk, one sentence, what reform is. Ukraine is the most transparent, corrupt country. So we really have this transparency, but there is no proper responsibility after corruption is uncovered. So we have the question to Oleksandra now. Investigative journalists, even in times of Yanukovych's presidency, were capable to find a lot of information. They carried out resonance investigations, even when there was lack of access to information. Now we have transparency that was mentioned by me and my colleagues. So you have much more work than before. So I have a provocative question to you. What should be done in the next 5 years in order that the investigative journalists had less work, not more?
First of all, I want to say that very soon the journalists will get less and less work. I think that's not true. They will get more and more work to do. Even if law enforcement system in Ukraine worked much better, even in this case, we were to have some work to do, but that's not the case now. And Ukraine still drastically lacks this feeling that the punishment is inevitable. And that's why the offenders, they keep making their offenses once and once again. This means actually that investigative journalists and honest journalists, professional journalists, should strengthen their work and continue their investigations, because due to the corrupt media, to the media which are owned by the oligarchs, Ukrainian public at large do not get the true information about the situation with corruption. I would like to emphasize that during the last several years in the regions we witnessed the appearance and effective functioning of some anti-corruption NGOs, but these NGOs, they require financial sustainability for their development, for retainment of professional experts, and this means that with the growing assets for which in course of decentralization go to the regions of Ukraine, much corruption is moving to the regional level. That's why that strong anti-corruption NGOs in the regions become of primarily importance. That's why I believe that one of our priority is to build up and to support the development and sustainability of such anti-corruption NGOs in the regions. Another big precondition for transparency are, of course, open data, because the lack of open data entails the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, because broad public, like journalists and investigative journalists, cannot get access to the data if they are in hard copies. Also, I would like to point out some budget managers like forestries, for example, they do not recognize that they are subject to the law about public procurement. They do not present how and publish how do they spend their budgets, and this creates non-transparency, while society needs to know whether there are any violations and abuses in this area. At the same time, the timber market in Ukraine remains one of the most hidden and most closest markets in this country, and while this is a multi-billion market, and that's why we should request for its opening for the broad public and for Ukrainian and foreign businessmen. And once again, I would like to emphasize the importance of open data and of the digital communication in digital documents, because when there are bulks of papers, they could easily burned, they can easily disappear, while for transparency, you need all the information and communication to be stored somewhere, better in digital format. Thank you, Oleksandra. I would like to apologize for the specificity, for this consecutive translation. This is the result of technical details for connection in Zoom. And now my question to Frank. In post-Maidan Ukraine, the international partners are justly seen as one of the most efficient drivers of reforms, and the European Union is truly seen as the key player here. How do you see the key role of the European Union in supporting anti-corruption work in Ukraine for the next 5 years, and what are the specificities of the EU attitude to Ukraine after the latest report of the audit chamber recently, some months ago?
Thank you very much for having invited me and for this question. Now, first of all, it's obviously easy for me to speak as one of the last speakers because I can only agree with almost 100% with what everybody else said. I think Oleksandra Hubytska has hit the nail on the head when she said a very simple truth that goes beyond any theory of change. You can indeed develop a lot of paper-based theories and about how you would change the situation and how you would have less corruption, etc. But the basic truth remains. Why is it so that in the European Union, I'm speaking of countries, for instance, Denmark, Germany, Spain, Portugal, why is there less corruption in Ukraine? I'm not saying that there's no corruption, but why is there significantly less corruption? It is definitely not because people there are morally better or because they're less prone to being seduced by earning more money on the side. No, not at all. It is because they live in fear and terror. Every official knows that if he gets caught being corrupt, if he gets caught, and that's not only officials, everybody knows that if he or she is being caught being corrupt, he or she will go to prison. Absolutely no exception. There's no way you can buy your way out. You will go to prison. And what's worse, probably you will not only go to prison, but you will also be socially stigmatized when you get out, which is sometimes a worse punishment for people than actually going a couple of years to prison. And that is really the key. Being able to really make no exception, to have a policy of zero tolerance that basically installs fear in people. That's the basic truth. And I think there's still some way to go in Ukraine. Now, how do we get there? And what do we think as the European Union is important here? First of all, it's already been said, so I'll be short on this, sustaining the independence and effectiveness of all the anti-corruption institutional infrastructure. Now, it has been successfully established, but as you all know, it's a daily fight to keep them on the right path, to make sure that they continue to be independent, and very important also that the delineation of competences remains clear. As soon as this becomes blurred, it's going to be a nightmare, and the next possibility where such delineation of competences might be a problem is when hopefully the large-scale smuggling of commodities will be criminalized in Ukraine. That's a key element to close the space for corruption. And once that happens, the key question will be which bodies will be in a position to investigate cases of large-scale smuggling and the surrounding corruption. And here it must be absolutely crystal clear who does it and who has the competence. Then also when it comes to the recruitment of management and the senior staff, it is very important, obviously, that they maintain high-level integrity. And I think the path that Ukraine has wisely chosen, meaning that for a limited transitional period, you ask international donors to be also involved in this process, is a very wise decision. And I think that has helped to make sure that there is less internal influence of vested interests on the bodies that are supposed to select and recruit this senior staff. But then it's not only about, obviously, going after the symptoms of corruption, but it's also equally important, if not more important, to go after the underlying causes. That is, you need to have a stronger focus on prevention of corruption, and that again is about reducing the space for it in key sectors. And indeed, this means that, there's some incoming calls. It means indeed that these key sectors must be, for instance, in competition, we need to strengthen competition and state aid control system to prevent high-level corruption and reduce the oligarchic influence in concentrated markets. That is very important. It has already been, to some extent, successful, for instance, in the energy sector, but here also there's still a lot to be done. I think the mandate and the capacities and also the professionalism and integrity of the energy regulator still has room for improvement. When it comes to legislation, I think what's very important, not yet really done, is a systematic anti-corruption check of draft laws. And I think we need people there who really have a lot of experience, people in a way with a certain criminal mind, but who are still on the good side, who could basically place themselves in the shoes of a criminal and see, okay, how could I use this draft law for my purposes? How could I develop a draft scheme, a corrupt scheme around this? And then systematically try to avoid the pitfalls of these draft laws. Then also implementation of the law on administrative procedure. That law has just been adopted in second reading. We really hope it'll be signed into force by the president very quickly, because that law is really a quiet revolution. It will bring about more accountability of civil servants, but more importantly, it will bring about a lot of transparency. And transparency is really key to closing the space for corruption. If you're transparent, it's much more difficult to be corrupt. Also, a salary reform in the public administration is absolutely important. The current system where almost everything depends on bonuses is not a good one. Everybody recognizes this. We realize that this is a very tough nut to crack, because salary reform in any system, in any public administration, is extremely difficult because of the implications to the budget, because of the implications to other groups of people who then feel that the public administration gets more than they should, and so on and so forth. So it's a huge general debate, but you cannot flee it forever. You must have this debate at one point and go forcefully about the salary reform, which is why we strongly support endeavors to do this, and why we strongly support the public administration reform. Then also you need a stronger focus on addressing the various enablers of corruption more effectively. And this means particularly addressing illicit financial flows, supporting measures for countering tax evasion, tax avoidance schemes, use of shell companies, have a much better force in place that goes after tax evaders, etc., because you can evade taxes and usually nothing happens. So you really need to speed up the frequency of checks for those people where there's a particular risk, and for those companies where there's a specific risk. Strengthen the civil confiscation, so non-conviction-based confiscation mechanisms, and also enhance the mechanisms for asset management, asset tracing, and recovery. Then finally, it was already said, so I'll be very short, developing and strengthening more innovative IT tools, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with Mr. Fyodorov. I think his ministry has done a great job already by digitalizing a lot of things. In many respects, Ukraine is much better than what we have in most of our member states, so congratulations for this. And who says digitization says transparency, and who says transparency says less corruption. And then finally, also I couldn't support more what has been said already. We need to upscale the support to civil society and independent media. We've done this in the past, but it was maybe not enough. And this is also an area where we agree with the Court of Auditors that we need to do even more, and both at the central and local level. That's been a long list, and I'll stop here. Otherwise, I will continue talking for another hour, but I'm looking forward to hearing any questions. Thank you very much.
Дуже дякую, пане Френк.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. And I'd been writing after you, and now I see that we have a long list of to-dos for the next 5 years. And as far as I understand, one of the most important is to preserve and to strengthen the institutional capacity of anti-corruption bodies which already exist in Ukraine, to launch the efficient functioning of those bodies, like SAP, then strengthen ARMA and NAZK, then to look at corruption as a trans-sectional, trans-ministerial phenomena, and to focus our attention on anti-corruption work in the regions. Then to keep attention on the huge budget allocations which go to the regions, and keep an eye on that big money and how they are spent at the regional level. Then anti-corruption work at the level of public enterprises. And also the Anti-Monopoly Committee, which has to contribute to true market relations and become an anti-oligarch tool. Then digitalization, transparency, administrative procedures. So actually this shows that there are a lot of tasks and a lot of work to do. And this immediately brings me to the following questions, which I would very briefly ask to our speakers and ask for very brief answers. How agents of changes should act more efficiently to implement all those tasks which were described here. Artem, what is needed for better support of the regional activists? How do you think?
Здається,
Thank you. I believe that there are some questions about regional organizations that are working in the anti-corruption sector. They do not have enough expertise. This is not only about regional ones. This is about those who want to become influential organizations and to carry out reforms. Often, they lack experience. I will bring the example at the national level. We have AntAC, Anti-Corruption Action Center, that monitors everything about SEPO contest. They monitored everything around NABU and the Anti-Corruption Court. And I, as a consumer of this information, I was always informed about what was going on. And those stakeholders who take decisions, they also were provided with information. And we had the same situation in different areas, but there is no proper leader, no consolidated position of civil society to provide continuous monitoring. Or, simply speaking, they do not work properly with those stakeholders who deal with changes. Then those processes, they are derailed. This is about institutions where there was no proper consolidation. There should be proper mentorship and cooperation. Organizations should know each other and they should provide experience. How to monitor, how to inform, how to communicate. I believe that this should be an important component in support of civil society at the local level, especially. These organizations that want to position themselves, they want to demand changes for the better, they should get understanding how to do this correctly. As like in environmental sector, we want to be the source of information. Any person who wants to get information on draft law 3091, for example, concerning environmental control, what is ongoing, so they can address the source of information and they may get this information there. And those stakeholders who take decision, they should have the source of information. There should be influential, proper source. That would be important for them for taking decisions. So I believe this will be a proper level of cooperation. As I understand it, this is sharing of experience and mentorship of more experienced organizations for new organizations. right, this is about advocacy. These organizations, they should know how to implement those changes, and they should have this experience from more experienced organizations, and about control and watchdogging. So they should provide information, they should continuously support those who take decisions. I have similar question to you, Alexander, and this is from the side of investigative journalists. What can strengthen the work of investigative journalists at a local level, especially at a local level?
Наша редакція хоч і називається «Наші гроші Львів», але ми охоплюємо ще 4 інших регіони в західній України, тому що там немає жодного центру розслідувань.
Our news outlet is Nashi, Groshi.Lviv, but we cover also 4 more regions of the West, because they do not have their own news outlet for this topic.
В кожному з цих регіонів, звичайно, є поодинокі журналісти-розслідувачі, але я бачу, що вони потенційно можуть створити власні центри розслідувань, але їм бракує досвіду та знань, як це правильно зробити, як організувати свою роботу.
So in these regions, they have their own investigative journalists, of course, and they should create those centers, but they lack experience how to organize them.
Мені дуже імпонує досвід і експеримент, який проводили кілька років тому київська редакція «Наші гроші». В тих регіонах, де не було журналістів-розслідувачів, вони наймали на тривалий рік журналіста, якого вони навчали. І цей журналіст протягом тривалого часу продукував цікаві резонансні розслідування в цьому місті. І це дійсно спрацьовувало як інформаційна бомба в тих містах.
So I like the experience of Nashi Groshi Kiev. They had such an experiment. They hired a journalist and trained this journalist for the work in some region, and this work was really great. It was like information bomb.
Я думаю, що з центрами журналістських розслідувань у таких регіонах, де їх немає, потрібно діяти аналогічним чином. Тобто треба брати під своє крило групи цих журналістів, щоб ті центри більші, які вже існують в Україні, ділилися своїм досвідом і організації роботи, і того, як проводити ці розслідування, як захищатися від нападів. І такий постійний, регулярний супровід, він дійсно може дати той ефект, що в багатьох регіонах з'являться такі центри і зможуть повноцінно працювати. Але це дійсно тривала робота, це навіть не рік часу, то мінімум 3 роки приблизно.
So we need such centers for investigative journalists in different regions of Ukraine. And those regions that do not have such centers, they can be helped by those regions who have such centers, and they may provide proper expertise how to organize the work of the center, how to carry out these investigations, how to resist attacks on journalists, and they may help them in organizing all this. And I believe that we need about 3 years to do all this.
Наприклад, в одному з регіонів, де ми працюємо, зараз зароджується такий подібний центр розслідувань, але вони вже зіштовхуються з низкою проблем. Як забезпечити стабільність своєї роботи, як організуватися, де знайти гроші. І для таких центрів в невеликих регіонах це дуже велика проблема, і зазвичай вони проходять цей процес дуже довго до їхнього встановлення. Це було приблизно те ж саме і на прикладі нашого центру, тому що дійсно в перших 5 років ми дуже сильно боролися за свою стабільність і переймали досвід колег з Києва, які постійно настановлювали нас, як і що потрібно робити, як збудувати роботу цього незалежного медіа в регіоні.
So now one of the regions of Ukraine is trying to establish such a center of investigative journalism, and they have many problems, among them stability, how to organize everything properly, and how to find money for their activity. So this takes a lot of time, and I would like to say that for the first 5 years of work of our center, we also had some problems with stability and other issues, and our colleagues from Kiev, they greatly helped us in this.
І спосіб розслідування, вони не дають того ефекту, насправді, який очікується. Наша організація теж намагалася навчати журналістів в регіонах, але стикаємося з проблемами, з тією проблемою, що навіть після того, як ми поїхали, то вибуху і сплеску цих журналістських розслідувань немає, тому що журналісти працюють в якихось медіа, мають поточні завдання і не мають часу для того, щоб повноцінно займатися цим.
So we tried to help journalists, and we went to the regions and we provided some trainings, communications with journalists, and also workshops for them. We tried to work on a more individual level, but you know, it didn't produce a good effect because journalists, they have a lot of activities in their work, so they do their current tasks and they do not have time and resources to deal with these matters. And after we left, we haven't seen any increase of these cases, of these journalist investigations. So we believe that this work is not very efficient at this level. Thank you.
Дякую вам.
Thank you very much. Yaroslav, tell us, please. In your speech, you've said about involvement of international partners, that you got positive experience of international experts' involvement in different processes. And about Western partners, could they be involved more in the promotion of reforms in Ukraine? Yes, there is a mechanism that is really efficient. We have seen this mechanism in Kolomoisky case. These are personal sanctions. It's not popular mechanism, and some people say that if we bring this mechanism, this will make us look similar as an aggressive state, but we believe that we should provide these personal sanctions. And Artem also clearly said that some mechanisms, they do not work properly. That's why I believe the best mechanisms, these are personal sanctions. If we have proper proof of corruption actions. And I would like to mention one exemplary case when in 2014 Ukraine started to provide personal sanctions against Yanukovych's regime officials. And the state was not capable to form proper argumentation and to provide proper mechanisms. Yes, this is a tough step. And many of top officials, they are in offshore jurisdictions. And from these jurisdictions, they go to wealthy Western countries. So, briefly speaking, I believe this is the most efficient mechanism. Whether our partners are ready to use this mechanism, we have seen on the example of Kolomoisky that we can do this, it is efficient, and it brings proper effect. I would like to add several words. There is a wonderful mechanism of macrofinancial support that is linked to implementation of reforms. If we have positive experience of selection of officials with the participation of international experts, we may scale up this experience. Ukrainian situation shows that the leaders of newly created bodies, they identify their fate. The law may be great, but it would not be implemented if the procedure of selection of officials is not right. So I believe that we need to have these conditions spread to select environmental inspection members and state audit service members. So many new cases may be created due to this. And I see that Mr. Fedorov came now. So also you've said that we need to fight more with the money laundering. And we should do our home task. And Yaroslav mentioned that a lot of money is going to the Western countries' jurisdictions. And one of the recommendations of the audit to the European Union was to develop a mechanism to prohibit entry to the European Union to these oligarchs and corrupt officials. And that may be a powerful signal for them that they are not welcome there. First question to you, Frank, whether European Commission started to work in this area about visa bans. And the second question is more strategic one about the agents of change, how they may cooperate even more in order to implement this ambitious list in 5, not 10 or 15 years.
Well, as regards the visa bans, this is, I'm afraid, a very tricky one because we are governed by the rule of law, and the rule of law works both ways. Unfortunately, the rule of law also works for criminals because they have the right to defend themselves, and which means that if you want to implement a visa ban, you have to have very clear proof and not just some, vague allegations that this person did things that can lead to a visa ban. And I'm afraid very often we are dependent on information given to us by, for instance, the Prosecutor General of Ukraine or other bodies in Ukraine, and the quality of that information. And I'm not saying it's their fault. It's just the fact that it's very difficult to get the quality of that information that will allow us to effectively have a visa ban, because it doesn't make any sense to have a visa ban that will be overturned by the next judge in the European Union, because there's no proof that would justify such a visa ban. This is really the biggest problem. So again, the solution is through strengthening the institutions in Ukraine that are able to provide better quality information and material that allows us to have more of these visa bans. This being said, there is also on our side possibly a way to improve the mechanism, and indeed the European Court of Auditors has suggested that we look into this, and this is certainly something we have committed ourselves to. So we're also looking on our side how this mechanism can be improved, because indeed it would be very helpful if we would have a mechanism that would ban people that are corrupt from traveling into the European Union, and that goes mostly hand in hand with them then enjoying their assets they have bought, for instance, in the south of France or somewhere else. Thank you.
Дуже дякую вам, колеги, за ваш час. Дякую за ваші.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, for your time. And we wish you success in implementation of these things. And I give the floor to Ms. Kaleniuk, and she will be a moderator during discussion with Mikhailo Fedorov, Vice Prime Minister.